Some more head-to-heads. We're going to be looking at Leo Carlsson versus Adam Fantilli, and then David Reinbacher versus Tom Willander, and then which of those two defensemen would be a great partner for Lane Hutson and how they can help him improve his game. All that coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. During the summertime, though, it's going to be 3 times a week. I'm Hadi joined by Sebastian High, and on today's episode, we're going to be breaking down 2 head-to-heads for some different prospect pairings, both from the 2023 NHL Draft. We're going to start with a comparison of Leo Carlsson versus Adam Fantilli, and then we're going to be moving on to our second segment where we'll discuss David Reinbacher versus Tom Willander. And then we're going to kind of tie that into our third segment where we talk about Lane Hutson. Lane Hutson is going to be playing, hopefully, in Montreal with David Reinbacher eventually. And already this year, we know he's going to be playing with Boston University alongside Tom Willander. So we'll talk about how those two can help Lane Hutson develop his game even further and solidify his chances of becoming a top pair NHL power play quarterback down the line for the Montreal Canadiens. But before we get into any of that, just want to remind you our sponsor for today's episode is FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So visit fanduel.com/locked-on to get started. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Consider leaving us a comment, letting us know what you want us to talk about. If you have any questions, we leave the good questions for our episodes, so you have a chance to feature in the show. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always very much appreciated. So, Sebastian, we start off with a banger. Picks number 2 and 3 in last year's draft, Leo Carlsson and Adam Fantilli. They didn't go in the order that either of us thought they were going, but I wanted to kind of circle back on the two and have a talk about which of the two we prefer, which one do you think will have a better career, and also kind of how they compare stylistically. The way I see it is I see Fantilli as just as a broad generalization. I see Fantilli as the more chaotic element and Carlsson as the more kind of finesse element. But do you have that same read on them, or do you have something that differs there?
Oh, for sure. I think, in my view, Adam Fantilli, between the two players, is the player with more raw skill, more overall desire to make an impact on every single shift in terms of just he's consistently trying things that very, very few players even attempt, let alone pull off.
Yeah.
And he is a true offensive power forward. Like, the defensive game is growing. Same thing with Carlsson. I don't think either player has the most refined defensive game, but both players have both the tools and the intelligence to really build very, very solid defensive games. I think that road is a bit clearer for Leo Carlsson than it is for Adam Fantilli. And I think that Carlsson is likely the more composed and consistent playmaker between the two. But Fantilli has this element of raw skill that very, very few NHL prospects can match. And I don't think that Leo Carlsson can. But I think that both players have the upside to be first-line centermen. I just think that Fantilli has that higher-end upside. And as you said, Carlsson has a bit more finesse to his game. He's more controlled, and he's more mature and more refined than Fantilli is. I just think that Fantilli will be the more exciting NHL player, and I think that he also has a way longer runway in terms of overall improvement with the tools and capabilities that he has. So I personally would have picked Fantilli at 2. I didn't think it was overly close between the two prospects. I did have Leo Carlsson ranked 4th overall, but I had a big drop-off between the Fantilli-Michkov tier and Leo Carlsson. But look, the Anaheim Ducks landed a tremendous prospect in Leo Carlsson, and he would have been the easy number 1 pick in 2022 in terms of draft year capabilities. So, I think both teams, both Anaheim and Columbus, landed a very, very good prospect, but I definitely still would have taken Fantilli at 2 over Leo Carlsson.
Oh, for sure. And I don't think it's like for me either. I don't think it was really close on draft day. I just think that stylistically there are some drastic differences, but overall, like you said, like the floor and the upside are quite similar. I see both of them as near guaranteed second line centers. I don't think there's a realistic universe in which Carlsson is tops out as a third line center, even in the worst case scenario. Same thing for Fantilli. I think he's definitely got the raw skill and upside to reach a first line, but he's also got a safe floor given the skill set that he has. Fantilli for me is one of the best forecheckers I've ever seen. His ability to get under sticks, to use his body intelligently and not just outpower everyone. It's just usually a guy with that level of size at such a young age, playing against his age group, especially like he was last year in the USHL, you would usually see a guy like that basically outmuscle everyone and power his way through players and that kind of stuff. But Fantilli's developed some really decent technique in terms of forechecking ability, in terms of puck battles and all that stuff. He's able to outthink and outwork opponents without necessarily having to rely on his raw strength, which is really interesting to me. Given the physical setup that he has, he could just outpower players, but he doesn't. That's going to help him a lot at the NHL level once that competitive advantage disappears of size and strength. Once he's playing against defensemen that are the same size and weight as him, it's not going to be an issue for him because he's doing the right things on forechecks. And on top of that, he's got, for me, they project as different players fundamentally. I see Carlsson as a playmaking two-way forward at the NHL level. I see Adam Fantilli as a power forward scorer at the NHL level. They're different players at their core in terms of how they'll end up, in terms of the skill set that they have and the way that they can polish it into something decent. But for me, I see Fantilli as having a bit more versatility to his offensive game. I see Leo Carlsson as a player who is really good at what he does, but I have a lot of trouble seeing him develop a goal-scoring game beyond what he has right now. I have a time seeing him develop a power forward game, even though he has the frame for it. He doesn't have the technique that a Fantilli does on along the boards in terms of getting off the boards, and especially in terms of straight line, end-to-end, blue line to blue line ability. I see Fantilli as a lot more rapid and dynamic and powerful in his stride, which will help him drop the shoulder, drop to the net, whereas Carlsson's a more play between the checks, find soft ice, and connect plays well type of player. So they're fundamentally different players, but they really top out as in terms of point totals. I wouldn't be surprised if we see one or the other, reach 100 points or 90 points or that kind of thing. I see it as more realistic in Fantilli's case. So I don't know how I feel about that, but for me, it's just I see a clearer pathway to an above point per game player in Fantilli than Carlsson.
I fully agree. I think in terms of offensive games and offensive projections, it's not all that close between these two players, and that's with all due respect to Carlsson's very strong playmaking game. I think that there's certainly a possibility that he ends up as a point per game number one center, but Fantilli has that just high-end dynamic offensive upside. That said, I think that Leo Carlsson has a fairly clear path to developing into a really elite two-way center who, while I don't think the defensive impact is there yet, he is so intelligent and he shows so many bright flashes of defensive engagement and of reading like evolving offensive systems and how to slot in to most effectively break them up defensively, whether it's on the back check or just on the cycle defensively. I think that Leo Carlsson really can become a high-end defensive centerman just as well as he will be a high-end playmaking center offensively. So I think that Anaheim is landed an extremely good asset at number 2, and fans should not be sad about the draft pick at all because they're getting a player who, in my eyes, is kind of a coin toss between number 1 and number 2 center projection, which is incredible value and very understandable taking that risk at number 2 overall. I just think that with Fantilli, there may be perhaps less certainty of that high-end, impactful player. I think that Carlsson's a little bit safer. I think that there's, as you said, I don't think there's a world where Leo Carlsson does not become a top 6 center for a very long time. With Fantilli, it's really close to that, but I think that there's just a little bit less certainty because, as you said, he's more chaotic. He does play with tremendous risks, and I think there's a world where he ends up on the wing, right? And maybe on a second line wing if things really go awry with his development. But with Leo Carlsson, it's a plug and play. Like you don't really have to think too hard about it. And with Fantilli, I think that Columbus is going to have to be a lot more careful with just how they want to develop him in terms of maximizing the output of his development. Whereas Leo Carlsson, plug him anywhere and he's going to develop just fine, which
Yeah.
is also less stressful from a development perspective for Anaheim.
Oh, for sure. I'd say worst case scenario for Carlsson is a second line center. Worst case scenario for Fantilli is a second line winger. Is how I would kind of see it. But time will tell with these two. They're a very interesting case study in terms of what teams prefer at the NHL level, and we'll see how their development goes. But we'll talk about two more players who went in positions that we didn't necessarily expect them to, given how they started off at the start of the year and how they developed, and even near the end of the year went a bit higher than they might have gone on public scouts rankings. We've got David Reinbacher and Tom Willander coming up in just a second, but before I get into that, Sebastian, talk me through today's sponsor.
Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every single time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. And you can use those on anything ranging from spreads to player props to over and unders and far more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon.
All right, so moving on to our second head-to-head, another head-to-head from the 2023 NHL draft, two right-handed defensemen that went into top 12. We're talking about Tom Willander and David Reinbacher coming up here. So two very similar profiles of players with decent kind of comparables in terms of their overall abilities. We've got two very decent skaters with great gap control and rush defending, decent in their own zone as well. They're able to hold their own and read plays really well, and both have, in my opinion, decent but fairly limited offensive upside due to different reasons. What I see in David Reinbacher that could hold him back from being a top pair offensive player in terms of defensive abilities is you're looking at a player who has a locked top hand, who can't really stick handle all that well, and mainly relies on the periphery in order to, and especially on his skating on the periphery in order to create offensively. It worked in Switzerland with slightly larger ice surface, where a lot of structures are collapsing on the box, on the slot, and leaving the periphery of the ice wide open to skate around. And that's what we saw a lot from David Reinbacher, is a lot of circling around the ice, trying to find open space and then firing a shot through a lane, that kind of thing. Are those opportunities going to be available at the NHL level? I don't think so. And I think that that's a fair concern to have with Reinbacher's game. But overall, for me, Reinbacher was very clearly the most polished defensive player among defensemen in the 2023 NHL draft. And Tom Willander was fairly close to that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, this is no knock on Willander. He did go higher than a lot of people had him projected at 11th overall to the Vancouver Canucks, but he's a very, very good defensive player and a very, very good skater. His skating pops anytime you watch him. He's really fluid, really agile, and especially very powerful in his stride. Some defensemen like Luke Hughes, early years Erik Karlsson, they have this kind of effortlessness to their stride. I don't see that in Tom Willander, but the output is so explosive, so dynamic, and so solid that it's really interesting to see how those two are gonna develop. I know you had Tom Willander one slot ahead of David Reinbacher, kind of as a statement.
Yeah.
I want you to talk me through that. I still think I love Tom Willander. I still think David Reinbacher was the better player, even though I had both outside of my top 15. I still think there's a slight but reasonable gap between the two. So what's your take on that?
I mean, yeah, I had them ranked back to back at 15th and 16th, and I believe they were at the top of a tier for me. Yeah, they were. So they're the top two players I had in my mid-teens tier, and I think I struggled to really find a difference in my evaluation, in terms of overall projection between the two. At the end of the day, because Willander was a massive late riser on my board, just as he was with a lot of public scouts, and I've become a really, really big fan of his game. I have a ton of time for Tom Willander, and that said, I think I mainly ranked Willander ahead because the two were so tight for me, and I kind of wanted to just make a little statement in favor of Willander. And I think, as you mentioned, I think where the crux is between these two players is in their offensive games. I think defensively, both players are extremely reliable, very intelligent.
No question there. Yeah.
Reinbacher is a lot more physical in how he defends, but I think Willander's a little bit more cerebral and better with the timing of his in closing his gaps and overall in terms of stick checking, and the timing of it is really quite impressive for an 18-year-old player. And I think overall the defensive projections are really, really similar. I'd agree that Reinbacher's a little bit more refined because he has the physical elements of defending down a bit more pat than Willander does. But I've seen a lot of progression with Willander on that front in the last year. And I'm not all worried about the physical side of the game with him and his projection. I just think it might be a bit of a bigger strength for Reinbacher than Willander. But overall, I think it balances out defensively. I think the real difference between the two players is in like their offensive game, both in transition and in the offensive zone. As you mentioned, with Reinbacher, the weakness is the handling, and he stays often around the periphery. But his off-puck offensive game is very strong. Whether it's getting open in transition and being an outlet for teammates in terms of supporting the attack, or in the offensive zone, he's constantly moving around. And yes, he stays within space often, but he has a great understanding of how to move within that space to create openings, whether they are for himself or for a teammate. He's constantly moving around, and it's always very purposeful. He's a very, very strong off-puck offensive creator. The question is just his on-puck game. Willander, to me, is the exact opposite. This is a player who I think has very strong handling. I think he's a better raw passer than Reinbacher is. But the off-puck offensive game lacks a lot of confidence. And I don't think he has the same level of purpose off-puck as Reinbacher does in the offensive zone. While in transition, he's a lot more effective because he's, in my mind, a better skater. Like, both of these defensemen are high-end skaters, but Willander is a real notch above Reinbacher in my mind in terms of overall mobility and fluidity and getting from A to B the most efficiently and fast as possible. But in transition, Willander, I think, is better at deceiving his opponents, at creating openings for his opponents on the puck. I think he's quite a strong breakout defender, whether that's just from the back end or through the neutral zone, whereas Reinbacher is a raw passer in transition. And Willander kind of is that dual threat. And then in the offensive zone, Willander is again, he has the handling skill, he has the passing, he has a decent shot as well. Like, all the tools are there. He understands the game well. He's really intelligent. He can spot openings and attack them, but he just lacks confidence in doing so. And it's understandable. Like, he was a late riser for many reasons. He was gaining confidence quite rapidly as the year went on, but the one area where that didn't quite click in was in the offensive zone. And I think that's going to be a key for him. And I think one of the reasons that I might give the tiniest of edges to Willander in this debate, and I do think they are extremely comparable, and either player has a very good chance of being the better between the two at the end of the day. I might give the slightest edge to Willander, just because I think that it's a little bit of an easier fix in terms of him gaining that confidence in the offensive zone to becoming more active off puck and creating more openings for his line mates and really just pinching above the hash marks off puck. That's a really big thing, and moving more fluidly around the offensive zone. Like, Reinbacher loves to cycle around the offensive zone with or without the puck, like really going behind the net and shifting defensive structures. He really enjoys doing that. And I think Willander has a path to really learning that. Whereas with Reinbacher, the handling is a real concern of mine, and the overall on-puck game just hasn't convinced me at all as of yet. And I think that's a bit more of a challenge to work on with time. And I think that Willander, in terms of a blank slate to work off of, I think if I'm a development staff, I would slightly prefer like the toolkit and the overall projection that Willander could have in terms of development at the end of the day, but it's really tight.
It is very, very close. I mean, for me, it's just like you said, it's the things that come naturally to Willander don't come naturally to Reinbacher, in terms of the on puck game, and that's harder to teach, in my opinion, than to tell a player, "Hey, there's space there, go get it." You know, like that's an easier fix, personally. So I understand that. It's just, for me, Reinbacher has this. There's a drastic difference for me in the defensive game that makes him a lot more projectable. I feel like the floor for Reinbacher is so much higher than Willander's is, and they have similar ceilings, in my opinion, if the right things are fixed. The ceiling's harder to acquire for Reinbacher, but the ceilings are similar at the end of the day, even though Reinbacher has a slighter chance of reaching it. But the floor for me for Reinbacher is so clearly more concrete and solid than than the floor for Willander. But time will tell with those two. They're very, very interesting projects. Now, they're both going to be spending time, hopefully, with Lane Hutson. For Willander, it's certain, 100%. For Reinbacher, it's a bit more of a question mark, but we'll see how that goes. They worked really well off each other in rookie camp early on in the summer for Montreal. But we'll talk about how both of them can help mold Lane Hutson's game and improve it in certain areas. And we're going to sort of break that down and give you specifics on what Lane Hutson needs to work on and how those two can complement that. All that's coming up in our third segment here at Locked On NHL Prospects. All right, so to end things off with our final segment, we'll be talking about Lane Hutson and how playing with Tom Willander and hopefully down the line with David Reinbacher, the two players who just put head-to-head a second ago, how that can help mold his game and develop it, and how that can work out some of the weaknesses that he currently has in his game. Let's start with Tom Willander, because it's a sure bet that they're going to be playing together with Boston University. They're going to be the two best defensemen on that in that system, and they both complement each other really well in terms of skill sets. I think offensively in the offensive zone, the things that Lane Hutson does kind of prefer a defenseman who's activating offensively off the puck, and that might help Tom Willander develop that. I think that would be a fantastic thing for his game. But how can Willander help Lane Hutson in return in the offensive zone? And how can he help him, especially, heading back into his zone, defending the rush? Because that's one of Willander's best strengths, isn't it?
For sure, it is. And I think that having a pairing mate who thinks the game at a similar level, like I do think that Lane Hutson has the higher overall hockey IQ, but Willander is a really, really intelligent player. And being able to play with him in the offensive zone, and when pairing it with Willander's defensive abilities, I think will give Lane Hutson a little bit of a longer leash in terms of what he's able and feels comfortable trying and the risks that he wants to take. And I think that that's going to be very beneficial both for Lane Hutson's production and BU's overall strength as Boston University, where the two players will be playing. And I think that, also in defensive transition, Willander can make up massive gaps in space, and he can cover a really significant portion of ice on his own. That if there's a 2-on-1, there are a few NCAA defenders that I would trust more, in a defensive 2-on-1 than Tom Willander. Yeah. And I think that will give Lane Hutson a lot of that leeway. And on the flip side, I also think that there are really tools that the players can learn from each other. One of Lane Hutson's biggest weaknesses are his pivots. We've been talking about this for ages, and it was maybe the one thing that he didn't overall progress on all that much as a D+1. He progressed across the board, but pivots was kind of that one exception, and a bit of a glaring one at that. And Willander is one of the most fluid skaters that you can find outside of the NHL today. And his pivots are exceptionally smooth. His overall skating mechanics and his use of his outside edges is very, very impressive. And playing with a player like Willander will hopefully be able to teach Lane Hutson how to start learning those, not just mechanics, but also the habits of when to pivot, how to most efficiently pivot to maintain your momentum going backwards, right? I think that would be very beneficial to Hutson too. And also just in the defensive zone, you can Willander isn't the biggest or most physical player either. And Hutson can further learn just how to use the defensive tools that he has. And he does have some defensive tools that are quite strong. He just hasn't fully learned how to weaponize them to be an above average defender at the NCAA level. But I think that Willander will be able to kind of show him, whether it is verbally or just in practice and games, how to efficiently shut down plays as an undersized defenseman. And Hudson's a lot smaller for sure, but in terms of that limited reach, in terms of using your intelligence to really close those gaps first, and what the timing and the anticipation of closing them and shutting down plays, I think that Hutson will be able to learn a lot from Willander. So I think they're very complementary, just as Hutson and Reinbacher are. But it's going to be very fun this season for sure at Boston University.
Absolutely. And I see Reinbacher as kind of the complementary upgrade to Willander for Lane Hutson, because the things that Reinbacher are really good at are the things that Hutson need in his deep pairing in his partner when it comes to, from the offensive blue line downwards. You saw a lot of instances in rookie camp with Montreal of Lane Hutson holding onto pucks, deceiving opponents, faking a pass one way, and then just as David Reinbacher's hitting a pocket of space, he hits him with an area saucer pass right on the stick, and David Reinbacher's alone in the slot, ready to take a shot or ready to make a decisive pass or that kind of thing. These are things I haven't seen from Tom Willander in terms of activation offensively in the offensive zone. So to have a guy like Reinbacher who's decently good enough at everything else that Willander does, except for the on-puck game, and especially having him be better than Willander at the things that Lane Hutson needs from a D partner, I feel like Willander's the training wheels until Lane Hutson gets on the two-wheeled bicycle that is David Reinbacher, if that makes sense. It's just he'll be taking off those training wheels of having to adapt to a player and having to play off a player who doesn't have the natural ability to find space in the offensive zone. He goes from that to having a player who is basically going to give him the puck, let him work his magic, and then just pop up unmarked in the offensive zone, which is exactly what he needs. I feel like the fit with Reinbacher is a lot clearer for Hutson, given his strengths. I'm just worried that, I don't want them playing together right away, especially not in the next 2-3 years, because I want David Reinbacher to develop an on-puck game that he won't have a chance to develop if he's playing every minute of his NHL ice time with Lane Hutson. He's not going to be getting the puck. It's just not going to be a thing. And if he does get the puck, it's going to be in situations where he has to make a one-touch play. Either it's a one-time shot or a catch-and-release shot, or it's going to be a one-touch, slow down the puck and then make a pass type of play. That's the type of game he's going to have to play with Lane Hutson. I want David Reinbacher to develop an on-puck game, to develop his stick handling, and if he's playing from minute one with Lane Hutson the moment both of them hit the NHL, that's not going to be good for his game. I feel like if Reinbacher has to play NHL minutes this year, which I'm not a big fan of, if he does play in the NHL this year, I want him playing with Caden Gooley, because that's a much better opportunity for David Reinbacher to get more puck touches with open ice, where he's going to have to deke through the first layer of pressure and then put his head up and then find another opportunity to make a pass and then move forward up the ice. He's going to have to build plays incrementally. Whereas with, the difference between Gooley and Hutson is you give the puck to Hutson, Hudson's going to do all that for you. And all you have to do is just make sure you're not a defensive liability to your team, which Reinbacher never is. So he's basically not exploring any areas of his game that are mysteries right now. He's just playing within his comfort zone, which I want my players challenged. If I'm a development staff, I want my players to be challenged on the things they're not good at. So it is essential to me to see a David Reinbacher who's playing with a deep partner who's going to delegate a lot of the puck touches to him, because that'll force him into those situations. You can find that in the AHL with the staff that the Habs currently have on D in the AHL. He can find that back in Switzerland with a deep partner who's going to be forcing him into plays where he's going to have to stick handle through pressure, because he has no problem stick handling in a circle. Very Jeff Petrie-like in that situation where, he doesn't take many puck touches. He doesn't take many soft puck touches. He basically carries the puck, if that makes sense. He cradles the puck in his in the little hip pocket that he has and just skates it up the ice. You don't see him make many stick handling moves. You don't see that outside that top hand, moving up. You don't see that in Reinbacher's game. So I don't think Switzerland would be a good idea for him, because he's basically facing the same scenarios that he faced this year, and there's not going to be much improvement there. But if he's playing in the AHL full time on a smaller ice surface with less time and space to play, and having to make those puck touches in tight spaces, you're looking at a very, very decent opportunity to improve for Reinbacher. So the two will complement each other so very well in the future. It's just if you make them play together right now, neither of the two are exploring areas of their game that they're not comfortable with. So that's why I'm really happy that Hutson has that training wheel situation going on with Tom Willander and BU for his last year, which hopefully it should be his last year, right? I mean,
fingers crossed.
Thinking, right?
It should be, likely.
It should be, yeah. Having that last year with Tom Willander as kind of practice before he hits the NHL and hopefully plays with David Reinbacher on a second or third pair to start with, and then they both work their way up. That's a great opportunity for both of them. I feel like both could learn a lot in that tentative year of both developing with different deep partners that give them different objectives and opportunities to learn. So yeah, I'm excited to see how that goes.
Yeah, for sure. I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps things up for today's episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about. And if you have any questions, we always read our questions in the YouTube comment section and the best feature in our episodes. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your updates and news about the sporting world and what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our next episode as we continue with some head-to-heads and other subjects here. This has been Hadi Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.